Hi, I'm Meg Murray. I'm 14, I'm in high school. I'm kind of impatient, I'm a bad student, I'm a troublemaker, I'm always getting sent to the principal's office, kind of low self-esteem, and I worry a lot, also very impatient. But this book is the story of my life. It's called A Wrinkle in Time, and it was written by Madeleine L'Engle. Someone very important to me is my little brother, Charles Wallace, who I'm very close with. He's only 5, but he's a super genius. There's also my friend Calvin O'Keefe, who I meet in this story. He's tall, popular, sports star, junior in high school, but he kind of has a rough family life. Anyway, some of the other characters that I meet along the way in the story. First of all, my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Murray, they're both great scientists. They're awesome. Then there's the 3 witches, Mrs. What's-It, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Witch. They're going to help us in our journey. Then there's It. He's just a brain, no body. He's evil, and he controls the whole planet of Camazos. Anyway, speaking of Camazos, that's where this story takes me. It's a faraway planet, controlled by the evil brain called It. My story starts, though, back in New England in the 1960s. I'm going to read you a little passage from this book. It's from the chapter called The Black Thing. It's when me and Charles Wallace and Calvin are shown what we're really up against. The silver light from the enormous moon poured over them, blending the golden quality of the day, flowing over the children, over Mrs. What's-It, over the mountain peak. "Now we will turn around," Mrs. What's-It said, and at the quality of her voice, Meg was afraid again. But when they turned, she saw nothing. Ahead of them was the thin, clear blue of sky. Below them, the rocks thrusting out of the shifting sea of white clouds. "Now we will wait," Mrs. What's-It said, "for sunset and moonset." Almost as she spoke, the light began to deepen, to darken. "I want to watch the moon set," Charles Wallace said. "No, child. Do not turn around, any of you. Face out toward the dark. What I have to show you will be more visible then. Look ahead, straight ahead, as far as you can possibly look." Meg's eyes ached from the strain of looking and seeing nothing. Then, above the clouds which encircled the mountain, she seemed to see a shadow, a faint thing of darkness, so far off that she was scarcely sure she was really seeing it. Charles Wallace said, "What's that?" "That sort of shadow out there," Calvin gestured. "What is it? I don't like it." "Watch," Mrs. What's-It commanded. It was a shadow, nothing but a shadow. It was not even as tangible as a cloud. Was it cast by something, or was it a thing in itself? The sky darkened. The gold left the light, and they were surrounded by blue, blue deepening until there had been nothing but the evening sky. There now was a faint pulse of star, and then another and another. There were more stars than Meg had ever seen before. "The atmosphere is so thin here," Mrs. What's-It said, as though in answer to her unasked question, "that it does not obscure your vision as it would at home. Now look. Look straight ahead." Meg looked. The dark shadow was still there. It had not lessened or dispersed with the coming of night, and where the shadow was, the stars were not visible. What could there be about a shadow that was so terrible that she knew that there had never been before or ever would be anything again that would chill her with a fear that was beyond shuddering, beyond crying or screaming, beyond the possibility of comfort? Meg's hand holding the blossoms slowly dropped, and it seemed as though a knife gashed through her lungs. She gasped, but there was no air for her to breathe. Darkness glazed her eyes and mind, but as she started to fall into unconsciousness, her head dropped down into the flowers, which she was still clutching, and as she inhaled the fragrance of their purity, her mind and heart revived, and she sat up again. The shadow was still there, dark and dreadful. Anyway, A Wrinkle in Time. The plot summary, basically, Meg, Calvin, and Charles Wallace get tessered away to a faraway planet by the 3 witches. Tessering is like bending space and time to get from one place to another. Anyway, that's how they travel. It's pretty crazy. So they get tested away to Camazotz to try to save Mr. Murray, which they end up doing with a lot of trouble along the way. But when they leave Camazotz, Charles Wallace gets left behind in control of it. So Meg has to go back to get him, which she eventually successfully does, rescuing him from the powers of it due to love she has for her little brother. The genre of this story would be like science fiction, fantasy type stuff. The grade level, I would say probably 5th or 6th grade. There's a lot of big words in there, and the plot's kind of complicated. There's some big ideas, but I think my kids could be up for it. Anyway, some connections I made with the characters. With Meg, I kind of saw her, like I kind of saw myself in her shoes, just the way she had a lot of trouble in school, even though her parents like expected a lot of her, but they still had faith in her. So I kind of saw like a lot of myself in her. And with Charles Wallace, reminded me a lot of my little brother Paul, who is also really smart, but also like really innocent and such a good kid. He's awesome. And one final thought. What book that begins with the words, "It was a dark and stormy night," could not be great? That's all I have to say.